Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, Aaron and Kevin are talking about joy and the wonderful gift it is to have this joy in Jesus. Hey, we'll even talk a little bit about Halloween, and we may have some costumes on. So if you're just listening to this, you may want to pop over to YouTube and check it out at some point just to see the wonderful flair and addition of colors we brought to the set today. Well, with all that being said, as always, we hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Welcome back.
Hey, that was great.
Thanks. Yeah, trying out the new intro, new sound effects. We got a couple more sound effects today. What you know what that is?
Sounds like a maraca.
I was trying to think of something clever. It is a maraca.
Oh, a rattlesnake.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, watch out. If you're watching, of course, you know this. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about how you get dressed in the dark in the mornings.
We have talked about that.
And so you must have done that again today.
What makes you think that, Aaron?
I don't know. It's just the way, just the energy you're putting off today makes it seem.
That's the coffee.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, to those of you who are just listening to the podcast today, you are missing out. So you might want to throw it up on YouTube at a different point and take a look. But yeah, Kevin, you're decked out in what is this, a costume?
Yeah. This is kind of like my take on Gilligan's Island. It's kind of I call it Giano's Island.
Whoa,
yeah, which is an
fancy.
Italian, but he's actually Spanish. That's why he's maraca.
And I'm just myself a Minnesota Vikings super fan.
You do look super fantastic.
Yeah, you can't even quite see my T-shirt underneath, but
yeah,
it's a Viking shirt.
Yeah,
Viking sunglasses.
Helmet there in the background.
Yeah, that's for snacks actually.
Yeah, nice.
People just keep bringing me stuff for the Vikings, and so I'll take it.
What do you use the paddle for?
Is that what that is?
Oh, it looks like the top. It looks like it could be an oar.
Oh, like a canoe paddle?
Yeah, is this the top part though?
It's just a decoration.
Charcuterie board to
Oh,
go along with your helmet snack.
I suppose.
All right.
Well, we're not messing around. We're taking All Hallows Eve seriously today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
This I suppose this is being released on November 2nd.
The day after.
It'll be 2 days after. What?
After All Saints Day.
After All Saints Day.
Right. All Hallows
2 days
Day.
after Halloween.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've sometimes you look at these different like holidays. I've heard a lot of times it comes from non-Christians or skeptics of Christianity that like Christmas and Easter, that all these are pagan religions. And then so they'll say the same thing about like Halloween, that it too is a pagan religion and stuff. The history is a little bit confusing sometimes when you really dig into it, because it's different at different places. But when it comes to Halloween, the name of it literally comes from All Hallows Eve, right? So hallow, like
Hallowed
be the name, which means holy. Another word for holy is saints, or sanctus in the Latin.
Right.
So you say Hallows Eve, Halloween, right? So that's how we get the name Halloween.
Well, there you go. So, which is it is kind of an odd. It's odd that All Saints Day, right, is a day when you're remembering, the saints. So people who have gone before you, the kind of cloud of witnesses, right? Celebrating those who were faithful unto the Lord. Very different celebration the day before.
Yeah.
In terms of what it is now, I don't know if that's always been the case for All Hallows Eve.
So in some places, I've heard this history before too. That in some places, All Hallows Eve, the Christians would basically mock death. So it was a day to like play practical jokes and kind of tease death, because we know that
where death is your victory.
And then the next day we celebrate All Saints Day.
I see.
So
So there is some connection
There
to
is,
it. Then. Yeah. But I imagine those early, the way they mocked death is probably not by dressing up as the Grim Reaper, right?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, certainly these days, Halloween seems a lot more associated with, I don't know, death and pagan culture, I suppose.
Well,
it depends on the circles that you're in, I suppose. But.
Yeah, and maybe that's because I think when you were beginning, you were saying some people posit that these were always pagan holidays, right? And that the Christians were trying to kind of usurp them or redeem them or something.
Yeah.
But, it sounds to me almost like the reverse might be the case, at least when it comes to like Christmas, or Easter.
Those have certainly at least been commercialized.
Right. Yeah, and exactly, right. So, Santa or the Easter Bunny, right? Like not necessarily anything to do with the foundation of them. But
well, I was thinking about All Saints Day because that is, a lot of times we look at the passage from Hebrews that talks about how the great cloud of witnesses that surrounds us in the faith, right? That we have this cloud of witnesses who've either died in the faith or who are even alive right now, but these people who witness to us the fact that Jesus Christ is our Savior and our Lord, and that in Him we have life. Last week we ended the podcast by talking about people who were influential in our faith walks, and we named their names. And then in my sermon this last week, that was kind of the exercise that we wanted people to do as well, as we turn the page to Philippians and we see that Paul is super, super grateful for the love and the support of the Philippian church. And so we encouraged the congregation, hopefully some of you listening maybe took us up on this exercise, to take a thank you note and write it to someone who has affected you in the faith, really built you up in your walk with Jesus, and how that brings great joy. And so I was thinking about that with All Saints Day too, that, wow, yeah, there are, millions, billions of, witnesses attesting to Jesus. And I'm part of that. And so that's always a great reminder to us too, because I think we can feel very, very small sometimes, or very alone in our Christian faith. And so to know that we're part of something so much bigger, this body of Christ spans time and places and languages and tongues, and that's a beautiful thing to be part of.
That's right. Yeah, actually there was a member of our congregation, soon to be member, I should say. He's in the new members class right now, and he was part of something called the Jesus Film Project. This was back, a few decades ago, and where they made this, Christ film, Jesus movie, and but had it translated into a bunch of different languages. And so the one that he promoted and that he actually lent me to watch was in Ethiopia, and they translated this movie into the language of the people. They had 4,500 Ethiopian people show up for the premiere of this. Wow. Movie, and it's moving. Like, there's children watching, the story of Jesus, and likely for the very first time seeing it visually. And when it gets to the cross and to the betrayal, right, these kids are like weeping. They are just so moved by this Christ figure who they're coming to know and believe in. And it was a reminder to me this morning, just of we belong to a huge movement. Global, international, and that, so it stretches far and wide, but how cool too, to have the opportunity like you presented us with for this week to, kind of write our own Philippians letter, just a small little note, but it's in some respects, it's right in line with what Paul was doing, because he was encouraged by the cloud of witnesses that he knew of.
Right. And so I think a lot of times we look at the books of the Bible as either Paul or the writers giving encouragement to the people that they're writing to. And he does do that.
Sure.
But he's doing it because they also had encouraged him. Right. So this mutual encouragement, this mutual gratitude for one another increases joy and progresses this joy that is in us, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think it was you told me, I don't know if you know it anymore off the top of your head, but how many times the word joy shows up in the book of Philippians?
I think it's 14.
14?
Yeah, 14 times, and it's 4 chapters. I mean, it's not a huge book of the Bible, right? So it's more. There are more occurrences of the word joy than in any other book, except I think for Luke is the only one that beats it. But obviously, John, Matthew, Mark, Romans, Corinthians, all of those much longer than Philippians. But joy, there was a real intimacy between Paul and this congregation, clearly.
Right.
And it makes sense too, because they did support him. I mean, even practically.
Right.
And then we see too that part of being a Christian, it's not just it's not just a feeling or emotion when we think of joy or when we think of love, but it actually manifests itself, right? In deed. And that's what these Philippians had done. They had actually supported Paul in his ministry, and were maybe the only congregation to do so. Do we hear that?
I can't speak definitively of that, but
maybe they were the first. There's something that sets them apart, I feel like.
Well, for sure. I mean, we know about their gifts, I think, more than we know about the others. At least it's right up front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know in some of the other letters, they take collections as well. And sometimes it's not even for Paul. Sometimes it's for other congregations. Like I think the Corinthians take a collection for folks in Jerusalem. But anyways.
But just back to this whole idea of joy in and of itself, because I've heard some people talk about like that, Christian joy just simply means, just kind of equating it with believing in Jesus, and having a good attitude about it, and basically like differentiating joy and happiness. That happiness is sort of circumstantial, it's this effect on because you had a positive experience, while joy is deeper than that. And I don't disagree, but I think what I want to make a note of is that joy is also emotive. Like joy is expressed, and Christian joy is real and will oftentimes look like happiness.
Sure. Yeah. We shouldn't be
like
so
the
strong.
fact that we are wearing silly costumes, doing a very serious podcast, the most serious. I don't know. Some of you are like, oh, I got to turn off YouTube and just listen to them. I can't take them serious like this. I can't see his eyes. I can't see what's behind. I got a good poker face going.
Really good. You should be at the World Poker Tour right now.
I have joy. Look, my smile. But don't you think though? I don't know if you've ever heard that kind of sentiment before from well-meaning Christians that it's much more stoic, and we have to take this very seriously. And it's not that we don't take Jesus seriously. It's not that we don't take our faith seriously, but a joyful spirit is a joyful spirit. It is what you think that it is. It is somebody who probably smiles. It is somebody that has a good attitude, and it's not circumstantial. It's not based on whether they're feeling well or not. Like right now, Kevin, I don't know if you can tell, but my voice, it doesn't sound very good. I wrecked my voice. I feel fine. My voice does not.
Yeah.
That is not bringing me great joy.
Your voice isn't.
No.
Yeah.
So if I don't sound joyful, I am.
Deep down.
I want to press a button to show you how much joy.
That's the level of joy you're at?
Yeah.
That's like a good, that's an 8. I'll say it's an 8 at least.
It's a good joy.
Yeah, no, I know I think I know what you're saying. And I think that is maybe part of just our heritage, like when thinking of like German Lutherans, and I am German, so, I'm not trying to hate on the Germans, but in general, I think as a people, they are more stoic, and there's kind of this idea that, that showing emotion is, somehow, I don't know, weird, or, it's not right or appropriate or something like that. And sometimes I have heard that notion of a difference between happiness and joy. And I think it comes from a place of concern, like not wanting people to think that not wanting people to be just reactive to the circumstances in their life, right? So, things are good. I now have joy. Oh no, things are bad. Now I don't have joy, which is what you're saying. Like, it's not circumstantial. I mean, if it's circumstantial, it's because of the circumstance of Christ dying, rising, and all of what that brings to you, realities that brings to you.
Right.
But the thing is, if you meditate upon those realities, like if you remind yourself when things circumstantially are bad of those realities, it often does have a lifting effect, right? It allows you to praise God when you're in the midst of like the belly, for like Jonah, for instance. He's in the belly of the whale, like he's at the worst, the lowest depths. And yet he's praising God because he's gazing upon his temple, right? He's reminding himself of what God has done for Jonah and for the world.
Well, and that's what Paul and Silas were doing the very first time that they are
in prison.
In prison,
yeah.
Right? So they go to Philippi. There's no Christian people in Philippi. I don't think there's any Jewish people in Philippi. So Paul's going into this context where imagine that. Like,
yeah.
How would you bring Jesus into a situation where nobody knows Jesus? Nobody knows the narrative. Nobody's heard the name. Nobody's heard the concepts. All they know are these other cult type gods that the people worship, or the Caesar, And so Paul brings Jesus into that situation. But God's way of doing these kinds of things is crazy, right? So they're proclaiming Jesus in the streets. They cast out a demon from a slave girl.
That's right.
Who was making money for her handlers by fortune telling, and that slave girl was annoying Paul because she just kept following him around saying, "They're servants of the Most High God,"
That's right.
And
which sounds like proclaiming Jesus in one respect.
It's interesting. I mean,
isn't that interesting?
That is, I think that's real though.
Yeah.
The demons know Jesus.
Oh, right.
And so
yeah.
But Paul gets annoyed by the girl and casts out the demon in the name of Jesus, and then the slave girl is free, but the people get mad because they've lost their source of income.
Right.
So then the Roman guards come and beat. This is not a small matter. They severely beat them and flog them in the public square, basically.
Yeah.
And then throw them in prison.
Yeah. This is all in Acts 16, by the way.
16.
Yeah,
so
if you want to read it.
They get thrown, or they tell the jailer, you got to take care of these people. So he puts them in the inner cell so he doesn't lose them. And they're in the inner cell. And it's midnight. And at midnight, Paul and Silas are singing praises to God, praying and praising God. And the other people are listening to them.
Yeah.
That's what it says in Acts 16. The other prisoners are listening to them. So,
and I imagine that they're probably doing that. I'm thinking, just putting myself in Paul and Silas' shoes, I think they're just doing what Jonah did, right? They are now in the belly of the whale.
Yeah, exactly.
Things are bad, you know? So this isn't even, I don't think, in particular, like an evangelistic attempt. It's kind of just like, we're going to cling to the thing that brings us joy, right? Like, we're going to think that's going to lift us out of this. We're here physically, but we know someone else is with us. Like, we can have joy even in this circumstance. And so they kind of, then that's what singing songs and hymns and praying with one another does, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it reminds us of all the truths.
Right. Well, I've seen these kinds of things just happen. I've seen. I can't pinpoint it in my head where it was, but some sort of natural disaster or 9/11 or these kinds of things where I've seen like collective groups of people just pray together, or sing Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And so it's just the Spirit of God moves.
That's what I did. I got lost on a ski hill in Colorado when I was like 11 or 12.
Yeah.
And I was all alone and I was freaking out. And the only thing that came to my mind to do was just sing. It was a song that I had heard about God's presence. And I just sang it over and over to myself.
Really?
Yeah. And it's kind of what helped me get through that until I was reunited with my folks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's power in it. We were just talking earlier today about a fella who I knew over in my college years who had been distant, from Jesus and hadn't prayed with anybody for a long time, and we prayed and we kind of opened our eyes and the guy was weeping, because it's like you're reminding yourself of these truths that are so huge and they move you.
And I think we need to remember that when you're apart from Jesus, there's a gap. There's a darkness, I mean that in the nicest way possible, because I know a lot of people who don't believe in Jesus who are wonderful people, and they come across as joyful people, happy people, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to believe that there is a depth of wondering, or a depth of wanting something more, some kind of purpose, some kind of fulfillment, something like that. And when you're apart from Jesus, you don't know, you may not even know what you're missing. But then when you experience prayer, when you experience God's people living in this gift of joy that doesn't come from themselves or their circumstances, but comes from knowing Jesus and his love, that just it warms people's hearts.
Yeah.
It touches the depths of souls. And so if you're listening to this and you've been a Christian for a long time, and being part of the church and having a prayer life and all these kinds of things are, a regular part of your life, or at least you're familiar with them, for a lot of people, that is not all that familiar. It's not part of their regular living. And so, so this is where Paul talks in Philippians, and he'll do it even more, I think, next week in chapter 2, but talks about this fulfillment of joy, this contagion of joy, this joy being a great witness to the world. And I think that's what we see Paul and Silas experiencing when they're in jail,
right?
And the people are listening, and then they're able to baptize the jailer and his whole family. But then also, when Paul is writing this letter to the Philippians, he is in prison again in a different place.
That's right. Yeah.
And at this point, he's talking about the suffering that he's going through, and he's saying that even now I'm proclaiming Jesus, and the guards and the soldiers are hearing me talk about Jesus, and so basically what Paul is demonstrating is that when we cling to Jesus, we have joy in Jesus. When we suffer for Jesus, there's still joy in Jesus. And so when we suffer and we still cling to joy, that opens the eyes of other people to say, that is a different way of being.
Yeah, well, and I think too, that's if you find yourself as a Christian, at a place in your life where maybe you're sensing, I don't have a lot of joy. Okay, I hear you talking about it. I read it in the scriptures, but practically, no, I feel dry. I feel thirsty. I don't feel like my life is really being kind of, imbued with all this joy talk. And I think that could be also one of those dangers of saying, well, it's just this kind of mental concept and just another way to talk about your faith, right? Instead of being something you actually experience and live out. And I think in those times, if that's you today, if you're feeling, just dry, it feels backwards. It's and it's hard to do, I think. But that's that shows, in some ways, and again, not trying to be offensive about it, but kind of how hard-hearted we are. When I was watching that movie earlier today, the Jesus Film Project, and I saw these Ethiopian kids weeping at Jesus' death, it moved me. And part of the reason it moved me is because if I would have just watched that clip, I wouldn't have had any tears come to my eyes, I've been around this stuff, and we get kind of numb to things, or sometimes they lose that edge or that audacity to us of just how incredible this is, right? So then you see it fresh on someone else, and it's like, holy cow, I'm reminded of just how significant this is. And so I think, if you find yourself in that kind of dry space, a couple things you can do. One is do what David did, right? Because David went through a dry spell where he also felt distant from Jesus. And that's Psalm 51, right? When he's saying, restore to me the joy of my salvation. Like clearly David was experiencing a time in his life after his fall into sin with Bathsheba and everything. He felt distant and he felt low and he felt dry. I mean, he was not currently experiencing what you're talking about, I think, this experience presently of joy.
Right.
And so he calls out to God. So what can you do? Pray to God. And not just the prayers that you've memorized and can recite without really thinking about them. No, really either pray those prayers and think about the words you're saying. Because when I pray the Lord's Prayer, usually I'm like, this is too much. There's too much in here for me to actually think about. Like, because it's a heavy prayer, you know? Or just be honest with God about that dry place you're in. You know, I mean, that's kind of the conversation we see with Job and God too, is Job gets very open. He's very honest with God about where he is circumstantially. And God is willing. God shows us in the book of Job that he's willing to take it. Like he's willing to stand there and say, yeah, let us reason together. Throw it at me. Talk to me. Open yourself to me and let me come in and reveal myself to you. Right.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, the thing, I mentioned this in my sermon, but one of the things that brings me the greatest joy is in speaking of Jesus to other people and then watching Jesus take root in their lives and bring joy into them and see the reality of the power of Jesus Christ and his forgiveness and love and the power of the Spirit. And so we talked last week about being sent into the world, right? And I think a lot of times we hear this message as Christians, you got to go into the world and tell other people about Jesus. And we hear that again as some sort of mandate of like this, I got to do that. Yeah, that's going to be hard. I got to do that. I don't know how to do that. It's going to be hard, but I'll do, I'll try to do it. And we kind of do it begrudgingly, but I'll be honest with you, like that's where we see the reality of Jesus take root and we see lives changed. And that's what gets Jesus like out of just within you, and this thing that is like given to other people and it flows through you. It's not yours to hold on to. And I think that's what produces an incredible joy. And so I'm just, I really want you to be people who proclaim Jesus, who live in Jesus, for the sake of other people. But also, like, if you're feeling dry, if you're feeling like, I don't know, is Jesus really real? It's really not until you show other people and tell other people and you see the reality of Jesus and what he can do, that it kind of comes back to you and you receive that joy again. You know what I mean?
Well, that was going to be my second suggestion too, is just community in general.
Yes.
Right? Doing life together with other Christians, and then and being able to share and also experience kind of through others, which is what you're suggesting, the reality of God.
Right.
Because it's like me with the Ethiopian kids. Sometimes I'm in a dry spot and then I see the impact it has on someone else, and it affects you, Right. So like being able to share with someone else this truth about Jesus and seeing the effect it has on them, how moving that is. I had a conversation yesterday with someone who shared with me this prayer that they had been praying, kind of fervently, and it was a relational issue there was brokenness, right, in this relationship that was significant for this person, and that person came to visit, and it went so well, and it was this reality for them of, oh my gosh, this I never would have expected it to happen this way. How could it happen this way? We were praying about it. God actually heard. He actually cared. He revealed himself through this restoration in this relationship, and that's it's like moving to me to think like, oh my gosh, like if we could really hold on to the amount of power that God has, you know what I'm saying? Like if I, it's mind blowing,
right,
what he can do, and I lose sight of it. It's like I forget. And that's like we just kind of we get numb to things. And so, so I think you go to God honestly and otherwise get yourself into community with other people and see what God is doing and even participate as you're suggesting in it, because you're invited to, regardless as well of how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that's that distinction again, the right distinction between happiness and joy, right? Like you can have this joy. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. You have that salvation even if you're not experiencing the feeling of joy.
Yeah.
But as you engage in that salvation, as you meditate on it, as you walk with other people in it, it will bring you joy. It's what it does.
Yeah.
You know?
I can't remember if I shared it on this podcast. I think I've shared it in church at different times, but my dad is a very joyful person. Intentionally. Excuse me. But I remember growing up, there's a song, this is the day that the Lord has made, that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it, This is the day. Anyways.
Yep.
I most often heard my dad sing that song through gritted teeth, though.
He should have been singing. That's a psalm, right? That song is a psalm, isn't it?
Yeah, Psalm
Maybe he
118.
should have been singing Psalm 44.
Yeah, right.
You know,
But
pick a lament psalm.
yeah, it's okay to lament.
It is.
Bob. It actually is. But there's also that. It's kind of a funny reminder of like, but I also can choose. I can choose to live in joy also. So. But we want to be careful there. I mean, in all honesty, like,
I will not use that sentence.
Yeah, it's okay to lament. It's good to lament. It's good to also experience grief and sadness, because those are real emotions where we acknowledge the brokenness of this world and that things just aren't right.
Yeah, just be honest with yourself.
Right, and with God.
Yeah.
Right. But then at the same time, there is reason to rejoice, even in the darkest depths.
Yep.
And so we can't ever lose hope. We can't ever lose sight of that.
Right.
And so it's a balancing act for sure. But just always know that joy is not out of your reach.
Right.
Because joy comes with Jesus, and Jesus is always with you.
Yeah.
So.
And I love. I mean, hey, that kind of goes back to my first idea of like getting honest with God, but like use the scriptures to help your language with God too, like your prayer life. Use the Psalms.
Yeah.
They're really helpful. And that's what Paul and Silas are doing anyway. They're singing, psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. But the Psalms, I love, I forget which one it is, but it talks about, why are you downcast, O my soul?
Oh, yeah. It's all over the place, but yeah.
That's such a good line, because it's like, sometimes we don't even know why we're dry. It's like we haven't taken the time really to kind of dig out our hearts. Like, what is it that's really this thorn in me, or what's this kind of frustration I have? And so the psalmist is kind of like acknowledging, look, soul, you're downcast, but you have all this ammunition to not be. There's all these reminders of what God has done. So let's get at that. Let's get at that and hash it out with God and work it out with Him. And it's been helpful to me anyway to like let the Psalms kind of guide my own speaking to God, and especially when you're dealing, because the Psalms are varied in their emotionality. So you'll get Psalms that are very joyful, and sometimes that's the word you hear. Other times you get Psalms that are like, man, this sucks, and you're like, man, I needed to know that I wasn't alone today, And Jesus knows what it's like. I mean, He does. He knows what it's like to be in that very spot.
Yeah. And what you're encouraging is hugely important, and to those of you listening or watching, that is our hope and our desire, that you're in God's Word and reading and reflecting and thinking and praying and doing all these things. But I'll be honest, Kevin, like that is a way of being in the world that not a lot of people do. I think a lot of people, a lot of the population, a lot of our culture is just sort of heads down, just keep going, not really pay attention to the inner workings of their hearts or their minds, just deny a lot of that stuff, push it aside, numb out. And so we are, what I'm saying is, like, we have incredible tools that God has gifted us with, for our benefit, but also for the benefit of the world, that we are encouraged to think deeply on these things and to reflect and to be honest and real and find joy and hope in Jesus. Like that is something, it's very, very countercultural. So if you're listening to this and you're you're a very cultural Christian, or you're very Christianized in your way of being, just don't take this stuff for granted. Yes, use it yourself, but live it and demonstrate it to other people in your life, because likely they're living in a totally different kind of experience of life than you are.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Yeah. So the joy of Jesus is real,
Yeah.
and we are living it. I mean, I didn't even mention the reason I'm wearing all this Viking stuff is that they're really, really good.
Yeah.
Or at least the teams they're playing aren't good. And
except for the Eagles.
Yeah. And so they bring me a lot of joy this year.
This season. Yeah. That's circumstantial.
And that is circumstantial, but I don't care. I'm throwing everything out I said. No, it's fun. It's fun. It's been good to be with you, with you, Kevin. And to those of you listening, Jesus is with you. That means joy is a reality for you. So go with great joy.
All right.